Hello and welcome to everyone for our wonderful session we have today. We're very proud to have the producers and people behind an amazing film, Live the Life You Please. I want to extend a huge welcome to Mike and Sue from Moonshine Agency. Hello to you. And to everyone that's joined us today on this webinar. This topic is really one that I know we've just been through Palliative Care Week, but I know in our sector in aged care, death and dying and palliative care is forever part of our awareness. We understand the different trajectories of people's illnesses, sometimes their disease process. And palliative care really has an opportunity to increase the quality of life for people who are in that phase or have had a diagnosis of a terminal life condition. So this is a really interesting one, but it's a very upbeat and positive and amazing experience and project. Now, I also want to say also a thank you. I don't know if Cheryl may join us, but Cheryl Holmes, another good friend of ours at Spiritual Health Australia or Association, and also the team at Palliative Care Australia, who also have been instrumental in bringing this project together. Big lead introduction to that, sorry. I do want to just do our acknowledgement of country. And I like to read out a spoken acknowledgement of country, which was created by a First Nations man called Jonathan Hill. And it goes like this. Today we stand in footsteps millennia old. May we acknowledge the traditional owners, in my case of the Gadigal Nation in Sydney, and the nations you are working from today, whose cultures and customs have nurtured and continue to nurture this land since men and women awoke from the great dream. Meaningful Aging Australia honours the presence of these ancestors who reside in the imagination of this land and whose irrepressible spirituality flows throughout creation. And Jonathan's a poet who lives in New South Wales, and he has Indigenous as well as Filipino heritage, and he works as a teacher in the field of Aboriginal education, teaching students about First Nations in the national curriculum. So I think that's wonderful. So again, formal welcome to everyone here today. So today's session is a bit of a Q&A about the topic of palliative care, but in particular, this remarkable film, Live the Life You Please. And I just want to open it up now. Welcome to you, Sue and Mike, and just ask you, tell us about this film. For those of us who haven't seen the advertisements and it hasn't come into their line of sight yet, what is this film about? How did you come about making it?
It's a great question, and a little hard to know where to start with that. But the film itself is a really interesting exploration into the stories of people from right across Australia in all different walks of life, from regional Australia right through to the big cities. And our approach was really just exploring what is end of life in Australia like, and access to palliative care and related services, and what does that mean and what does that look like. And so what we were able to do was capture some amazing stories with some very remarkable people who opened up their hearts to us and shared their stories, and probably one of the most vulnerable periods of their lives. And it's come together to be a really beautiful film. And it's a film that you would think would be incredibly challenging and hard to watch, but in actual fact, and we know this because we've been in the cinemas seeing some of the sessions, so we're not just saying this, but we've actually witnessed this. People are laughing, and at the end of the sessions during the Q&As expressing that they felt a sense of joy or really really rewarded by having seen it, or it's almost like it unblocks people to have difficult conversations. So I feel like I rambled a bit there. I don't know if you've got some more to contribute, Mike.
I think that's really good. I think part of your question there was about, why did we make this film, and why did we make this film now? So I agree with everything that Sue said, that the end product, if you haven't come across it yet, or you want to see it and share it with your community, is a very uplifting take on end of life. We felt like there was quite a lot of exposés that came out, particularly around aged care, and especially during the pandemic. And we wanted to present a more aspirational view of what can be achieved at the end of life when people are really well supported. So looking for those types of stories where people were well supported by their loved ones and their community, but also the health service, to really be able to do the things they wanted to do with the time they had left, with the people they wanted to spend time with. And it's been a really exciting period for us releasing this film, which came out on the first day of National Palliative Care Week a couple of weeks ago. Its world premiere was at Parliament House in Canberra, and it's been screening in 55 cinemas around the country, including a lot of regional areas, and had about 150 sessions so far. So thousands of Australians have had a chance to see this on the big screen. And what we're hearing is that it is really helping to address that issue that you said, Sue, about unblocking or unlocking people to have conversations that they find it difficult to otherwise get into. So the National Palliative Care Survey told us that 88% of Australians think that it's important to talk about what their wishes are if they become seriously or terminally ill. However, over 50% of us never have that conversation. So we're finding it really hard to get that conversation started. So we've created this film, hopefully, as a conversation starter to help people on that journey.
Sounds so amazing. That's a wonderful response to this work. And I'm really excited about seeing it myself. I've had a little bit of a preview to it, and I really can't wait to see it up here in New South Wales. I think it's really interesting that we talk about, it's one of those things, death and dying, palliative care, there's misunderstandings of the place that palliative care can hold for someone and the benefits of palliative care, early intervention of palliative care. It's such an interesting one. My mum died on the 14th of January this year, and I was her primary carer. And in the period, I posted about 4 LinkedIn posts, both, a couple prior to her dying and a couple after her passing. And I had 30,000 hits and people reaching out to me. Many people where they were also caring for elderly parents, or perhaps that they've had brushes with ill health themselves. And so that told me a lot. Out of 4 posts, that was a lot of people who were interested, who actually just wanted this opportunity, I think, as you've said, to have a conversation, to actually someone to broach the topic. And it's quite remarkable. And then when we did a palliative care, during Palliative Care Week, we did a free webinar session with one of our partners at Anchor Excellence. And we had 800 registrations, which was the largest registrations that they've ever had before in the time that they've ever run them. So it really sort of makes me think that people are craving. So do you feel that this is a vehicle for people to kind of bring people along and start introducing them to the topic? Is it a kind of a piece where you can educate others?
I think it's both of those things. So we've actually had a few people that we heard in audience responses saying, this film, I need to be able to share this with all of my friends and family, or I have to take this into my workplace and show all of my colleagues. Someone who worked in aged care specifically said, you know, I've got to get this into my facility. I've got to get everyone to see it. So people, once they see the film, do have that really strong sense of I need, you know, so-and-so or X, Y, and Z to see this so that I can talk to them about it.
Oh.
So I definitely think that that's coming from the film. People, you know, I think we talked about the unblocking, the unlocking. People are seeing that opportunity within the film. So it's really interesting you're mentioning around the LinkedIn posts, and we've been doing a lot of filmmaking in palliative care since I think 2012. So quite a long time now. We've been really immersed in this particular area for telling stories. And we constantly get told by, you know, broadcasters or people who commission film work, it's too hard. No one wants to see that. No one wants to talk about that. No one wants to know about that. And so we've gotten quite good at working our way around that. And this film is probably the film that's broken through in the biggest way, I would say, on this topic. And all that resistance isn't there. You know, we had a national cinema chain through Village and Event Cinemas actually wanting to screen it in their cinemas. You know, they were
That's
open.
huge.
That's right. They wanted it. They wanted it to be available to the Australian public. And so even the short films online that we've put out through the Live a Life You Please YouTube channel, we've been absolutely blown away by the uptake of those films. And one particular film we put out, and we thought, you know, I mean, you never know. You never know what's going to cut through, what's going to work, what's not. But this one particular film, and it was titled Choosing to Die at Home. And within 2 weeks, it had had something like 250,000 views. And we just went, well, people want these stories. They want to engage with these stories. They're meaningful. And so I think that, I'm not quite sure if I've answered the question, but I think what I was sort of coming to is people want the opportunity to see these stories and to be able to talk.
It's definitely meeting a need that's out there, isn't it? And to have that incredibly successful way that you've crafted so skillfully to present this work, so that, as you said, the likes of you know, your villages and kind of commercial brands are willing to, you know, and want to have and show this film is amazing. To get that sort of, you know, that success of that is just such, you know, so commendable to get that, you know, wider exposure for this need. I wondered, I know that, and I don't want to give away too much about the film because we want everyone to go and see it, but I know that there are specific people who are in the film, that are featured in the film, and one particular gentleman who'd had suffered great loss, and he kind of introduces the beginning, or you know, gives us kind of, it's kind of like our guide, if you like. How did you get to meet some of these people, and were you sort of a bit concerned about having the conversations and how intrusive it might be into their lives, and did that sort of coincide with the reality?
Well, we've had a lot of feedback on Simon Waring, who's the presenter, who also appeared on Insight about a week ago on SBS. So some of you may have seen that, and he's and the feedback's been really overwhelmingly positive about the great work Simon did in taking the audience on a journey. So Simon's a father who, you know, lost a child to stillbirth, and then lost his wife to cancer, and within 5 weeks, his 4-year-old son to cancer as well. So he knows loss and grief intimately, but he's really very, you know, extraordinary in the way that he's turned that into a position of gratitude and learning, and really sharing with people what that's meant to him in terms of his own life story, and helping them to not only share that with the audience, but then take them on a journey through lots of other experiences across the country. So hats off to Simon. He's doing such a great job as an advocate in this space, and we hope to see much more of him. He's a real natural. As far as how did we feel about, talking to people, during this stage of life, it might be a bit like your experience when you shared the story of your mum. It actually gives people permission to talk about this subject, which they find very difficult to talk about otherwise. And, we found in every single case of the dozens of Australians that we met and filmed with on the course of this journey that was a real two-way win-win scenario where we were able to capture these remarkable insights, but they were able to share, their life stories and what was important to them in a way that they may not have been able to do in their day-to-day life because of, the way that we talk to one another in families, etc. That might not be a natural thing to launch into, here's my whole story and this is what it means to me and this is what I value and this is what's taken on you and more important value to me at this stage of life. So I think that was really nice to be able to capture that. And then for some of the participants who passed away, family members have subsequently reached out and said, can we get access to, the filming that you did? And of course, we always provide that. And it's a great memory for them to have as well.
That's really amazing. It's wonderful. I was interested also around, I guess we touch on, because spirituality and spiritual care, I know this is very much about is very integrated into this story and having Spiritual Care Australia and Palliative Care Australia being part of the process. Did you find that, can you reflect at all on, I guess, having spirituality as being an element there, the benefit of that? Because I think that, if I think about, again, in my mum's case, the clinical trajectory of her disease process, she died of cancer. So she had a kind of a trajectory that followed very similar pathway of having a number of medical incidents and treatments and bounces and then sort of recovery, but each time not quite reaching, the previous state's health, and then eventually death, end of life. But her spiritual trajectory was very different to that sort of medical timeline trajectory. So she was, in my mum's case, was very deepening her spirituality before she died. In fact, I think she started on that process. Was always a spiritual person, but really started deepening that as soon as she could sense a lump in her neck, which instinctively she felt was, this is the cancer come back. It's come back, and this time it's gonna take me this time. Although she was positive about treatments, she'd really deepened her spirituality. And when we went through the different treatment processes and then also right through to the dying day, spirituality really eased some of her suffering. There were things that could be done medically wise to help with pain or with nausea or with other kinds of elements of discomfort. But I know right to the very end, us praying with mum beside her bed when her eyes were closed and only hearing was possible, us saying her prayers with her helped. I could see that the restlessness had started to subside and she was appreciating. She knew that we were praying for her and praying with her. Of course, there's no way of proving that, but can you reflect on the benefit of that kind of spirituality and what you observed?
Yeah, thanks for sharing that about your personal experience. It really really flows with a lot of what we learned through the process of making this film. Spirituality, and we're so glad that spiritual health came on board for this project, because spirituality, and we're so glad that spiritual health came on board for this project, because spirituality, and we're so glad that spiritual health came on board for this project, because spirituality, and we're so glad that spiritual health came on board for this project, because spirituality, and we're so glad that spiritual health came on board for this project, because spirituality, and we're so glad that spiritual health came on board for this project, because spirituality, and we're so glad that spiritual health came on board for this project, because spirituality, and we're so glad that spiritual health came on board for this project, because spirituality, and we're so glad that spiritual health came on board for this project, because spirituality, and we're so glad that spiritual health came on board for this project, because spirituality, and we're so glad that spiritual health came on board for this project, because spirituality, and we're so glad that spiritual health came on board for this project, because spirituality, and we're so gl it wasn't something we'd really explored in previous projects. And I don't think I personally really quite understood what spirituality really meant. And I think there's a lot of myth busting that we're able to do in regards to that by having that as one of the themes in the film, because I think, and myself included, initially when people hear spirituality, they think religion. And that's not the case. Spirituality is very unique to every individual, and the way they express it or experience it. It may be religious, but it may also have very little to do with any kind of faith. So, and Russell, who is in the film, he's a spiritual health worker, and he explains it beautifully throughout the film and through a number of stories that are told in the film about the way people are engaging with spirituality. And it is a really big part of the palliative care suite of, you know, things that palliative care umbrellas, and it's in there. And so I think it was a really meaningful thing to be able to include it and to show it and to show examples of it to help other people understand what it is. And it's certainly something that we saw in the participants who shared their stories, how meaningful it was once they were able to kind of work with a spiritual health worker to kind of understand for themselves what it even was, if they weren't previously already engaged in some way in spirituality. So I'm not sure, did you have more reflections on that?
It was interesting to me to see what spirituality meant to different people. It was really, really diverse. You know, so there were people of faith, like you described, but there were people who the most important thing was just having a party, you know, with all of their, you know, connecting with people right near the end. And when we're in Arnhem Land, I think for a lot of the people we were filming with, getting on country and actually being on country and doing things where they were connecting on country were possibly some of the most important things in their life at that time. So spirituality takes on a lot of forms that you'll see in the film. And you know, it's really interesting with the people who we filmed with. You know, often the cancer treatment or whatever was going on the treatment front was not the focus of what they wanted to talk about, or what they were saying was most helpful, although it might be prolonging their life and being, you know, really important to their physical health. They kept coming back to that's what was important to them, and that often was some form of spirituality in terms of, you know, how they were making sense of that experience.
Yes, yeah. And I think, you know, it's, you know, approaching palliative care in that sense, there's just so much that, you know, I know, again, if you don't mind, I'll draw back onto Mum. But I do remember once Mum went into palliative care and all the active treatment, she'd had so much battering of different tests and different things, and even a hip operation about a couple of months before she died, a broken arm. There were sort of all sorts of different things, pumps and, you know, all sorts of stuff hanging off her. But when all of this kind of settled down and she went into palliative care, there was a beautiful physician who came to see her, and Mum was just, she couldn't stop telling me about this particular physician who said to her some simple words, and that was, tell me about yourself. I want to know all about you, your story. I want to know how it is, you know, what can I do to help you, but what can I learn from you? Can teach me things. And she was floored. She was someone who was pretty in awe of people who've got doctor at the beginning of their name. She, you know, and to have someone who was this kind of really, you know, highly regarded specialist asking her those questions. I just wished that those questions had been asked a lot earlier for Mum. Do you think that some of the things you saw in the film, does it touch on some of these aspects of what palliative care can offer before palliative care as well, or approaches to caring for people with illness?
Yeah, I think it does. I mean, palliative care, I think that's one of the biggest misunderstandings about palliative care is that it's just for that very end of life, last few days or weeks. It's, when you go into hospice, you've got days to live, or, these perceptions of it. Whereas the specialists really talk about it as palliative care can start at the moment of diagnosis. And I think what you're touching on there is that there's elements of it that can start before you even get sick. You can start at any point, is having those conversations and exploring what's meaningful to you, what's important, having all those conversations, asking people. It's interesting you pointed out how much your mother really responded to just being asked about herself, because I think as a documentary filmmaker, it's a very natural thing for me. I ask 1,000 questions of everyone I meet. I'm really interested in people and what they say and do, but I recognize that that's not normal. Most people don't ask those questions. I probably don't even ask my parents that much about their childhood or how they grew up. And now I've got children, and it's the grandkids asking the grandparents, well, what was it like when you went to school? And I think, gee, I actually don't even know what my mum would say to that, because I think we just assume people are who they are and we don't dive into it. But you can actually have such a deep and meaningful experience exploring that with people, and it shouldn't have to wait until someone's right in the last end of their life. You should be able to do that at any point, really.
Yeah, I don't think it's limited to palliative care either. I think what you've described is that person-centered care. And we heard in film, I think about my own experience with my own GP, because they just swap out all the time at my clinic. They probably don't even know my name, whereas the GPs that we meet in the film, are so closely involved, in the families they were working with. And that was really important to people coming towards the end of their life, that they had a GP they could really rely on and who knew what made them tick and what was important to them. Also in aged care, we heard that time and time again, that, if you're working in aged care, what the residents really care about is that person-centered approach. So I think there's a lot to be learned from all of these aspects of the health system, in terms of when it's person-centered, we're just responding a lot better to it than when it's a bit arm's length and clinical. So yeah, I think that can knock on right through the whole system and not just be about this last stage of life.
And I know that people who've joined us today and who watch this webinar afterwards, they're members of Meaningful Aging Australia and do, have that in their hearts. And I'm sure that they, this resonates with them deeply, because they are interested in understanding the holistic aspect of a person, and that kind of human right of being able to express their individuality. And so this sounds just such a wonderful film. I have one other question, and then I think it might be really good to get people's questions who are attending, if people would like to think about a question that they have for Sue and Mike. So my question is more around the aspects of, so if I see this beautiful film and I manage to get a few people to come with me and kind of demystify some things, stimulate some ideas and thinking, and then some discussions, is there some tools and resources? And forgive me, you may already have these in place and I'm not aware of them as yet, but can you tell us, is there other ways that we can interact? You were mentioning the YouTube site. Are there other resources?
Yeah, so from the film Live Life You Please, there is a YouTube channel which has got a whole lot of little short films which you can certainly dive into and explore and leave comments, and quite a few of them have got some really interesting chats that have been happening just on the YouTube platform related to those films, so you can kind of engage and connect in that way there. I know Palliative Care Australia has a huge resource part on their site, and I believe Spiritual Health Association does as well. So definitely check out those two sites, as well as the Live Life You Please YouTube platform.
And I think we should add in Advanced Care Planning Australia.
Oh, yes, yes. Advanced Care
Yes.
Planning Australia also has a lot of resources that are be good to explore as well. So once you sort of dig into all of that, there's a lot there.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And thank you, Marnie. I can see you've put in the chat the Live Your Life You Please website and links there, which is wonderful. So would people like to put their hand up? If you can use in the functionality of Zoom to put your hand up if you'd like to ask a question. Please do so. That would be wonderful. I've got another question in the meantime, whilst we're waiting to see if someone pops their hand up. How do you both fill your cup? I usually ask people this question in terms of, it's very much from that broader spirituality aspect. It must have been quite an intense time, both the planning, the filming, the editing, all that work that you put in, and then obviously launching this into the world. If we think about kind of that nurturing yourself, whether it's, being connected to nature or friends and family or faith or reflective practices, what do you do for yourselves?
I think we're both feeling pretty exhausted.
Yeah.
So I would say that we need to fill that cup a bit more.
Yeah.
So I think we need to get to that bit, but it's been such an incredibly busy period, to be honest.
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, I just like sitting down reading a book. I find that really fills my cup. So if I can find 20 minutes to sit and read a book, I'm pretty happy.
And look, at this point in a journey of making something, it's probably a bit like writing a book, but when you make a film, you're really feeding off the audience reaction. So last night the film showed at Deck Chair Cinema in Darwin, which is an outdoor cinema up there. So we've been hearing the reports this morning of what that's meant to people and what types of questions were asked afterwards. And they're really different, depending on what audiences are looking at them in different parts of Australia. So that's filling my cup at the moment, because it's why you do this work. We describe ourselves as impact filmmakers because our intent is to make some kind of positive social impact. So at the moment, that's what we're feeding off. And then sort of reflecting on, like probably your experience, when you were posting about your mum, it's quite emotional, but you're also getting a lot of real world feedback about what's really important to people. And I think just taking that on board is, incredibly enriching as well.
That's so wonderful. What a service to others that you've offered. So would you say that this is making this film, and it sounds like you've done had a history in making these kinds of films and wonderful social impact films, but has this film changed you?
Yeah, I think so. I think it really helps keep you grounded to what's really important. You can get so busy. I mean, we all know what busy is, and you can just run around in circles being, but then when you stop and you go, okay, what's really important? What are the things that really make me feel like, as you were saying, what fills your cup? What are the things that you can really put more into each day? And I've heard many people say this, so I realize it's a said thing, but don't sweat the small stuff. And it's so true, where you put your energy into is really important. So I think that's just come through time and time again with doing this work and speaking to people, who are at that end of life, and they really bring home how important it is to really nurture your friends and family and, invest in experiences and, that quality time with people. So,
yeah. Mike, did you want to add to that, or you're?
Look, definitely. I think doing this work and the work that you all do would change you, as a person. And I think we need to support each other, all of us as a community, through that, because sometimes that can be quite challenging, having so much perspective, it can be quite a bit to take on, because it demands you to change some things in your life. You can't just keep doing things the same way that you might have been doing them if you've identified that they're not as important as you thought they were, or they weren't worth all that time after all. So I think it's a great opportunity, a bit of a challenge in getting there, but ultimately you're better off for it. And that's a process of growth that I think we're probably all on that on this call. We're all experiencing that in a different way.
Yeah. I also wondered around, again, with mum, because I was with mum and because of the work that I do, it was very interesting seeing from the perspective of kind of intellectually knowing about things. This is what happens when someone dies. This is how the body looks. This is how things change. This is what to sort of anticipate. But, I realized, and I thought, I can remember as a child going to, or a young teenager going to my grandmother's funeral. And I kind of went into shock. It was frightening. It was so different. No one had spoken about death and dying, and we hadn't, been exposed to it up until that point. And similarly, my younger brother, through the process with mum, I sort of made sure that there were points where I kind of told him or gave him some information along the way, even when we sat with mum's body and you could see her skin changing and some of the things that were changing, and in a very kind, compassionate way, just letting him know, letting him to sort of witness some of these aspects in that, and that happens. And he tells me that this was really of benefit for him, because it was like this threshold that was not quite a rite of passage, but it's certainly a threshold of life that he had not really been intimately connected with. So, I think that, I think maybe could we benefit more from getting more intimately aware. There's other cultures that, I don't know if in the making of the film, you sort of looked at different cultures that treat death in a different way, but I just feel like we're so removed from it in a Western sense.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's just Australia, but I think it's definitely a Western kind of a phenomenon. I know Sue and I made a film about a palliative care doctor in India, and it was completely different, seeing how many in the Indian culture, really, death is part of life for kids growing up from a really young age. And I think there's a lot to be said for that. And we certainly, think that this film's suitable for kids, and our own children have seen it, but it's been classified with an M rating. So what does that tell us?
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, we were quite surprised by the classification, because, and I do think that Mike's right, it does speak to how uncomfortable people still are with this topic, because there's actually nothing in the film, there's nothing in it that would be difficult for children to be exposed to.
But it's been censored by our own government. So I think even at that level, it's
still not ready.
It's going to take time. It's going to take a long time, but there's definitely a lot to be learned, and a lot to be learned from our First Nations people as well, because they have a totally different take on this part of life that, is what I've observed. It's a very different to the Western view.
Oh, yes, very, very much that we can learn. I have one question that's come in from Ben. Thanks, Ben, for your question. And Ben said, with all the experiences and stories you've had or heard, do you feel you have a good idea of what your own palliative care will look like?
Definitely no futile treatment, and trying to avoid ambulances and EDs and stuff. It's really interesting. I think when in the film we hear from the head of the emergency department at St Vincent's in Melbourne, which is one of the busiest emergency departments in the country. And, he said, as good as this place is for emergency medicine, it's the last place I'd want to be towards the end of my life. And I agree with that, but the only way you can get that outcome is to articulate it, to your loved ones, but also ideally in something like an advanced care plan. What about you?
Yeah, I think that's something that I wouldn't want to be in an over medicalized situation, and I wouldn't want to be in an ICU if it wasn't necessary. And so I think, yeah, I think that's what it's made me think about, is what would I actually want, and realizing that, I wouldn't want to hang on to every possible treatment to prolong if the quality of life wasn't there anymore. So I think it's definitely made me realize what is quality of life. And I think as well, also realizing that it's really important to ask the questions. Like, I think a lot of people express that who are going through treatments, really asking, what is this actually going to do for me? What result is going to come from this? Is having that treatment, it might give me an extra month, but will I be able to do anything with that month? But it's understanding that you can be empowered to ask questions. You don't have to just blindly go along with what everyone's telling you. You should, advocate for yourself, or have a family member who's empowered to advocate for you.
And the other thing that we learned, which might be interesting to your audience here, is that only 1 in 50 people in aged care can access palliative care right now. So that reform's urgent and necessary right now. The funding model has to change. The integration needs to work much better, because people are in aged care, just being admitted into hospital is not, the solution that most people want. That's not the outcome that we're after. And it's also really costly to the health system. So we keep hearing about how expensive everything is in the health system. We need to have this conversation. We need government to respond to this, that we now know that most Australians actually don't want that type of end-of-life experience. And for those who choose that, that's available to them. And it's available to people right now. And that's what we get as the default setting. But it's not the only way. So we show in the film there's lots of other pathways available, but they're not available to everyone at the moment because the services aren't universally distributed.
That sounds like something we can definitely get behind as well, to support, absolutely. And again, I know that, our wonderful people who work in aged care, they do form these very good relationships and strong bonds with people, and, establishing that communication with families and people who are connected with someone who might be in residential aged care or in-home care. And why would you want to kind of disrupt that and then put someone into a very highly medicalized space, where they don't necessarily know your name, they don't know your story, they don't know some of those things. I really think what was so wonderful about Mum towards the end as well, even though she was in a lot of pain and discomfort, there were times where it was really difficult for her, but having that consistency of people who were around her, who knew that, yes, she could have a little sip of cup of tea and she liked it made in a certain way. And when it was just so incredible to her, having our dog come in, the friends and family being able to come and spend time with her outside of kind of the visiting hours, the regular visiting hours, and for her to see, nature outside and connect with that, which was so important. But I also think there was one aspect that if only we could do this is, and I wondered your thoughts about this, is the particular facility where we had Mum for her end of life period, they had a beautiful program to have a final wish that they could have. Is this kind of explored in the film?
We didn't specifically explore wishes in this film. Certainly some of the stories go into things that people have been able to achieve. One person took up tennis in his last sort of months of life, learned to play tennis, got a huge amount of pleasure out of, taking on a new skill. And another person was doing a lot of work on a property that they owned, and, you know, just progressing on projects, you know, and a lot of fulfillment people were getting from that. But that's a bit different to wish fulfillment. So no, we didn't really explore that on this one.
Yeah, you know, yeah, that's right. Often the wishes had to do with, you know, creating something to get up out of bed every day for, you know, or to, you know, to do something that was really meaningful to themselves and their loved ones. So, you know, that, you know, is really important. And a recurring theme is that, you know, we don't stop wanting to do things, you know, like when we get seriously ill. And we shouldn't, you know. So I think that's another argument for trying to keep people out of hospital where they can't do much, and in other settings, and that's also cheaper. We know that that saves, you know, 2 to 4 times in aged care, for example. If you invest in integrating services in aged care, we know that's going to save 4 times as much as people having to go in and out of hospitals all the time.
That is so wonderful. And I do want to just say as well that with that final wish, unfortunately, Mum's trajectory was that that final wish wasn't able to be fully realised as much as it would like to, because of, you know, the end of life process that sort of got compacted really quickly. And, you know, so as much as that was beautiful, I mean, what you've just said there is, yeah, don't leave the final wish to the final moment, because it might not be possible, it might not be achievable. And as beautiful as that might be, it's so much better to live the life you please. So I think that is a beautiful spot for us to round out our conversation with you today. Can I just extend our heartfelt thanks to the work you do? And I hope that many of our aged care people and wonderful colleagues, and especially our spiritual care practitioners and people involved with Meaningful Aging Australia, gets to see this, because it sounds like just such a remarkable achievement, and I'm sure it'll touch lots of people. Thank you so very, very much, and thank you to everyone who came along today.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
You're most welcome.